We're all set? We're finally ready, my crack team. Hi, everyone. So today we're going to talk about my first impressions of the MoFi SourcePoint 888 speakers. I did the unboxing a little while ago. One of the boys will link the description, link in the description box. Just a couple of quick notes. The speakers are $4,999 US. Like, why not just say $5,000, right? Like, seriously, $4,999 or $7,250 Canadian. They are a three-way speaker. So for those of you who don't know what a three-way means, a three-way just simply means that the speaker, when the signal comes in, it's divided into three paths. One path that goes to the bass, another path that goes into the mid-range, and a third, of course, goes to the tweeter. And in the case of the speaker, when you look at the speaker, and again, the guys will throw a picture up so you can see, there are two woofers. Two of them are 8-inch woofers, and so that's the bass. And then the second signal goes to the mid-range, which is the upper 8-inch driver. If you look at it carefully, it's there's a hole in the middle, and then you see a tweeter in there. So the 8-inch woofer is actually a mid-range driver, and then finally the tweeter produces the high frequencies. So you have three 8-inch drivers. Two of them are for the bass, and then one for the mid-range, and then you have a 1 1/4-inch soft dome tweeter. The 8-inch drivers all use paper. By the way, before I forget, for those of you who subscribe to Qobuz, Andrew Jones's playlist can be found on Qobuz. So I highly recommend that you guys download it. It's free. He's got a great compilation of wonderful music, and in all the cases, I believe they're all very good recordings because he uses it for demonstrations. So a little free tip for you. All right, so who is Andrew Jones? Well, let me give you a quick summary of his resume. He was a Bachelor of Physics. He did his Master of Computer-Aided Crossover Design. And then in 1993, he became the Chief Engineer of KEF till 1994. So that's what, 11 years. And this was back during KEF's heyday, back when KEF and Bowers and Wilkins, back then known as B&W, were the two strongest British manufacturers of speakers. I remember KEF being such a highly admired and desirable brand. So this was when he was there. And then he came to the US and became the chief engineer for Infinity Systems, 1994 to 1997, so for 3 years. And then he joined Pioneer Electronics, and he was the director of speaker engineering from 1997 to 2015, so quite a long time. And while he was at Pioneer, their high-end division is TAD, and he also developed all those speakers there. And then in 2015, he went and joined as a VP of engineering at ELAC America. He was there from 2015 to 2023. And then finally, he became head of loudspeaker design for MoFi Electronics from 2021 till present day. So Andrew Jones obviously has a very long and successful career as a speaker designer, 41 years, I believe. Okay, I first heard about Andrew Jones. Up until then, I didn't know who he was. I had heard his designs, but I didn't know who he was. I first saw him at a Winter Consumer Electronics show. I was there and walked into this room that says TAD, and I, of course, had heard about TAD as speaker manufacturers of the professional industry, but I didn't know that they were starting to make products for the consumer world. So I went in to listen to it, and I was astounded. Here were speakers that looked like they were still speakers, so they didn't have these odd, maybe controversial shapes, but they sounded impressive, very, very impressive. And here's this really nice, likable guy with a British accent who said he was the chief designer and went into some detail about the design. And of course, being an audio nerd, I was fascinated with his designs. I had a few moments to speak with him and said to myself, one of these days I'll get to know him better. Anyway, fast forward. When he went to work with ELAC, I became a dealer. Actually, when he was still with TAD, I was a dealer. And then when he went to work with ELAC, I immediately joined because I knew given how good the TAD speakers were, that whatever he designed for ELAC would be fantastic as well. And so I became a dealer, and very, very happy that I was. The MoFi SourcePoint speakers are his vision of what is possible at a reasonable price. Now, of course, I want to underline what's reasonable in the high-end audio world. Not necessarily reasonable for a lot of people. A lot of people cannot afford the kind of stuff and toys that we play with, but certainly by audiophile standards, very reasonable. The first one was the SourcePoint 10, which we did a review of. It's a stand-mounted speaker that I had coined the mini fridge of speakers, because it looks like a mini fridge. It's big. And then they came out with the SourcePoint 8, which is a smaller version because it's an 8-inch woofer. And then now the SourcePoint 888. And 888 is not only representative of the 3 8-inch woofers, but also for the Asian market, especially the Southeast Asian market. 8 is a good number. So 888 means triple good. So anyway, that's the 888 speakers. All the drivers are designed by Andrew Jones and then custom manufactured for the SourcePoint speakers. These are not speakers that you can buy off the shelf. You cannot buy them from third-party manufacturers. They're just not the same. Also, the enclosures are built to a very high standard. Those of you who have not seen MoFi SourcePoint speakers, go take a look. They are really well built. Very thick enclosures. The front baffle is very, very thick and faceted to minimize diffraction. And then finally, the mid-range high-frequency driver, being a dual concentric driver, is also relatively unique. It's not new. Tenor has been doing it for 100 years. But Andrew Jones happens to like the dual concentric design, and so he continues to design with it. All right, how does it sound? Well, first let me tell you about the room. The room is our, what we term, home theater / audio room. It's roughly 13 feet wide by 18 feet long, and although we have a false ceiling at 9 feet, the actual ceiling is 20 feet, so it's a reasonably large size room. I used primarily the Hagel H190 integrated amplifier, which is rated at 150 watts per channel to 8 ohms, stable down to 2 ohms. I used the Eversolo DMP A8 streamer with the digital output straight into the Hagel. Now, I also happen to use, which I'll get into as well, other amplifiers as well, just to see what it would sound like. For this first impressions video, I did not compare it to other speakers. That will come later. All right, first impressions. Very, very good. Right off the bat, as soon as we plugged it in and I listened to it, I was very impressed. Smooth. First thought that came to my mind, wow, they are very, very smooth. Reminded me of old school British speakers like the old Kefs, the old Celestians, the B&W 801s. It had that really nice, smooth, rich mid-range, but with lots of details. So not missing anything, just very smooth. And I think a large part of it has to do with how powerful and rich and dynamic and effortless the bass is. So the harmonics of the bass go up into the high frequencies, and you hear this richness of the mid-range. Let it break in, and then came back to listen to it, and over the course of, I would say, 5 listening sessions, this morning being the last one, I spent about 4 hours this morning. I formed my ideas of what it seems to sound like. Let's start with the bass. As I mentioned earlier, bass is very, very full, powerful, dynamic, effortless. You can throw all your audiophile recordings at it, and it will do it with no problem whatsoever. In fact, you'd swear you were listening to a much, much bigger speaker. And these are not small speakers necessarily, but you would swear you're listening to much larger speakers or the subwoofers. As a matter of fact, I think 2 listening sessions ago, I couldn't believe that there was that much bass. So I went over. We have a subwoofer behind the speaker, behind the left speaker, and I thought it was on because there was so much bass coming out of the speaker. But no, the subwoofer was not on. And just to be on the safe side, I unplugged it just to be sure. And wow, the bass is just really, really good. I think Andrew Jones specs it down to about 30, 32 hertz, and it definitely sounds like it. The one thing I should also note is that there is no muddiness in the bass unless your room causes that or you're playing recordings that are substandard. But assuming that the recording's good, the bass is very delineated, very clear. There's no overhang, there's no boominess, nothing like that. It's fast, but with richness and power. Okay, moving up in the mid-range, as I mentioned earlier, smooth, warm, like I wrote down like a good tube amplifier. It has that richness that's very beguiling, very easy to listen to, but not, again, losing any kind of detail or resolution. It has all of that. It's just that it's got that richness that I find quite appealing. High frequencies, I noted down here, C mid-range. In other words, smooth, but also extended. Again, I think Andrew Jones specs it up to about 30,000 cycles, plus or minus 3 dB. The one thing I will note here, it perhaps might be seemingly lacking a little bit of sparkle, like a very, very good AMT tweeter or a ribbon tweeter or the very best beryllium tweeters. Now keep in mind, this is a speaker designed to sell for $5,000 US, so maybe it could be a whole lot better if you use different design techniques and so on, but I just want to say that I missed a little bit of that. I missed a little bit of that airiness of my Magnepans or my more expensive Martin Logan speakers with the AMT driver that they've got. But otherwise, really nothing to complain about. Soundstage is very wide. It's definitely outside the speakers as long as the recording has it. But what's more interesting is that the depth layering is even better. I heard more depth, more impressive depth, and better layering than I heard in terms of width. So if you're in a condo with some space, these speakers will not only give you a wonderful sense of dimension, but the front wall will disappear when the recording has that information. Imaging is not pinpoint. It has dimension, which I like. I don't like it when a speaker gives me pinpoint imaging. It takes away the illusion, because when I listen to a vocalist or when I listen to a performer, a musician, that person has size and dimension. So when you play it back for me and I hear these pinpoint images, it throws me off. So I prefer what these speakers do. Image height is approximately the height of the speaker. So it's not extremely tall. It's not a midget. It's right around where the height of the speakers are. Dynamic contrast. So the difference between soft and loud is very good. It's not like a horn, which is exceptional, but it doesn't have the horn-like character either. For those of you who don't know what I mean by horn-like character, put your hands around your mouth. I've got two boys in front of me monitoring the video as I'm talking, and if I put my hands around my mouth, can you hear how my voice changes? They're both nodding very obviously. That's what I mean by horn-like coloration. In this case, even though the tweeter is right in the middle of a 10-inch driver, I don't hear much of that. In fact, I hear very little of it. And I'm extremely sensitive to horn-like characteristics. I don't like it. It's one of the reasons why I've never been able to buy and keep a pair of horn speakers. Even to this day, I've heard most of the newer ones and I still don't like it. But with these, I don't really hear that characteristic. So again, dynamic contrast is very, very good. But it's even more impressive at lifelike levels. Now, what do I mean by that? If you, one of the little tricks I should mention, if you want your speakers to potentially sound as good as they can be, play the music as if it is reproducing the content. So if you're listening to, for example, Diana Krall singing quietly on a piano, her voice level ideally should be as if she is there in front of you. It shouldn't be way too soft. It shouldn't be way too loud. Similarly, if you're listening to an acoustic guitar, the acoustic guitar should not be too soft. It should not sound like an electric guitar. It should be roughly at that level. And when you play it at the right level, it will sound more real. So when I play the speakers at lifelike levels, they sound fabulous. When I turn the volume down, the dynamic contrast is not quite as good. I speculate that perhaps it's because the drivers are maybe too big, and at low levels maybe they're a little bit heavy. This is all BS, right? I just have no idea whether or not it's true. I'm just giving you my impression of that. And for those of you who have an opportunity to listen to the speakers or own the speakers, check it out. That doesn't mean that at low volume, say late night listening, it's not seductive, that it's not good enough. It is. I'm just saying that at live levels, it's really good, okay? And by the way, almost every speaker that I know of, there is a sweet spot. There's a point where they sound incredible, and at certain levels they don't sound great, and at other levels they also fall behind. So, just keep that in mind. The other thing that I thought of it could be is that maybe it's the average sensitivity. Sensitivity, I believe, is spec'd at about 86 dB. That's not bad. That's about average. So I was using the Hagel H190, which is rated at 150 watts per channel. But when I switched over to the 390, everything came to life. Even at lower levels, it just sounded more powerful and dynamic and interesting, if you will. I also switched to the Macintosh MA8950 integrated amplifier, and that's one of my favorite integrated amps. It's beautiful, it's warm, it's lush, it's dynamic, it's clean, and so on. But interestingly enough, not a great match. And part of it, I think it's because it's too warm. The Macintosh is already warm. The speakers by themselves are fairly warm. Two combined together may be too much of a good thing. It's like coffee. If you go to your favorite coffee shop, like in Canada, we call it Tim Hortons, and you say, coffee with, 2 shots of sugar, it's okay. But let's say you go triple, or, 10 lumps of sugar, then you're drinking sugar water. It's not. So for me, as much as I'm a huge fan of Macintosh, you guys who watch me, you know that's true. I think in this case, the Hagel is a better match for the MoFi speakers. And that also reminds me, if you've got Parasound, that's another really good one. Peachtree, another great one. Cambridge Audio, NAD, I think those will all be better matches than in this case with the Macintosh, unless you like something really warm and smooth. Resolution is above average, but not to the same level as panels like Maggie's or Martin Logan's. And here what I mean is that when you're listening to recordings, panels are generally a little bit thin sounding compared to dynamic speakers, and so you hear more heightened resolution as a result. And I think that's what it is, because I'm not really missing anything, it's just not quite as apparent, right? In fact, when I listened to the MoFi speakers, it kind of reminded me of earlier generations of Paradigms and PSB speakers that were highly influenced by Dr. Floyd Toole's research on speakers. And then it occurred to me that Andrew Jones, when he moved to the US first to work for Infinity, for Harman, well, Floyd Toole was, I can't remember his exact title, but certainly one of the top people in charge of speaker research, and he probably had access to all that research, and maybe some of it filtered into the speakers, either consciously or subconsciously. All I know is that it does have that reminiscence of those speakers. Here's the important thing. It does everything technically very, very well. I have nothing to complain about. There's nothing I can think of that it doesn't do well. It plays all sorts of music. I mentioned earlier about Andrew Jones's playlist. You can check out his music. It's all kinds of wonderful music. The key question for me is, you can do things technically perfectly. More importantly, does it reach your soul? Does it turn you on? Does it make you want to play music? Does it make you want to listen more? Because ultimately, that's what it should all be about. It should all be about musical enjoyment, as opposed to bass is an 8 out of 10, and mid-range is a 9 out of 10, and so on. All of that is meaningless if it doesn't pull you in. So, does it have the magic? Yes, it does. I'll give you a few examples. I mentioned in one of my earlier videos that I've been on a tear recently listening to a lot of classical music. So one of the classical pieces I've been listening to a lot of is Elizabeth Schwarzkopf singing Turandot Signori Ascolta, forgive my pronunciation. when I listen to Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, I just melt. She had one of the premier voices, just absolutely stunning and mesmerizing. I could listen to her all day. She could sing the phone book and I would listen. And when I listened to this piece of music, I had shivers. I was absolutely in heaven. Another one, Mercedes Sosa singing Gracias a la Vida. Don't know what that means. Client came in, played this for me, and I thought, oh my God, put it on my favorites, and I started listening to it, and oh, just a wonderful piece of music. Beautiful. Just makes me melt every time I listen to this piece of music. I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about one of my favorite albums of all time. If I ever was forced to go to a desert island and they happened to have power and I could bring my hi-fi piece of music and with my hi-fi system, this is an album I would absolutely grab. Recorded in January 24th, 1975. Keith Jarrett live at the Cologne concert. There's a very interesting story behind this. This album almost never happened. I'll tell you the backstory behind it. So I mentioned in the past that during the lockdown, I decided I was going to spend some time researching my favorite albums, the background, the musicians, and how it came to be, and so on and so forth. And so this was one of the ones that I had read about. Disaster after disaster happened to the point where Keith Jarrett wanted to call it off at least 3 times. For those of you who don't know, Keith Jarrett is one of these all-time great pianists. Not only does he play incredible jazz improvisation, he also is an extremely accomplished classical musician. If you go on YouTube, you can see him play Danny Boy, his version. And within 2 or 3 minutes, if you are not blown away by his virtuosity, then God help you. You shouldn't be in this industry. It is so beautiful. Look it up. YouTube, Danny Boy, Keith Jarrett. Anyway, he was booked to play at the Cologne Opera House, but because the Opera House was fully booked, he could only play from 11:30 onwards at night, right? So he had requested for a Bosendorfer Imperial Grand Piano for the concert performance. But due to some misunderstanding, the producers gave him an old piano, a little mini grand that was backstage, used sometimes for sort of warm up, but in really bad shape. The keys were not working properly, way out of tune, and the pedals were broken, didn't work properly. So they put it on stage for him, and then when it was discovered, it was almost too late. They had to scramble to get a tuner. The tuner came over, and after many, many, many hours of working on it, it was somewhat workable, serviceable, but the broken pedals were still broken pedals. Keith Jarrett, when he heard, he says, I can't play on this piano. He wanted to cancel. So then the producer of the concert said, well, let's see if we can find a replacement piano. They eventually found a replacement piano, an actual concert grand. The problem was the piano tuner said, look, even if you could find a piano, the fact that you are transporting it in this weather, it will actually be in some ways worse because of the weather and the humidity, and everything has to be retuned again and so on. So Keith Jarrett finally said, okay, we'll use this piano. Keith Jarrett had given a performance a few days before in Zurich, and he decided to drive from Zurich to Cologne. And during that trip, it was a very long and arduous trip. It was painful. He had a back problem, so he was wearing a back brace. And when he finally got to Cologne, he was not well rested, in fact, very tired and in pain. So in addition to that, with all the piano issues, he decided, okay, let's go get dinner before the performance. And he goes to this place for his sandwiches, and they mixed up his order. So by the time his dinner came, it was almost time for the concert. He ate very, very little. So now he gets to the concert. He's got a disaster of a piano in front of him. And again, at that point, he almost decided to call it all off. He was in a bad mood, right? Hadn't eaten, hadn't slept properly, his back is giving him trouble, the piano's a disaster, he's not in a good mood. And again, he decided, let's cancel the thing. But the producer of the concert said, look, it's sold out. Everybody's here. The engineers have set up the concert. All the microphones are in place. So he finally decided, let's go ahead. Now, what's fascinating is this. The entire concert is based on improvisation. In other words, he has no idea what he's going to do. He's just going to just go for it. He'll play a few notes and then he'll just improvise. It's not based on any existing music, any jazz standards. He just starts playing. So the first few bars, 4 notes, it's basically him tentatively trying to figure out the piano to see what it sounds like, what the issues are. What I didn't mention was when the defective piano was first brought on stage and they started to play on it, they noticed that the lower keys, the bass keys, were very thin and tinny and weak, and the high frequencies sounded absolutely horrible. As I mentioned, the pedals are broken. So the first few notes were for him to sort of figure out what the piano sounds like and what he could use and what he could improvise on. And what's interesting is as he continues to play, he will create a theme and then he will continue to work on the theme over and over and over again, developing more and more and more sounds around what the piano sounds like and what the strengths are, where the weaknesses are, and using the strengths and weaknesses to create a unique sound that only that piano, the irony of the piano being a terrible piano, creating a sound that only the piano could give. So I mentioned earlier, I mentioned that the recording, the piano playing was done in such a way as to take advantage of the weaknesses of the piano. And here's a perfect example. Part 2 of the concert, when you're listening to it, I mentioned the pedals are broken. And if you listen, when he engages the pedals, it thumps. And it adds a sense of percussiveness. The first time I heard it, I thought, oh, he's somehow slapping on the piano. Like, you know, Chick Corea was famous for going into the piano and pulling on the strings to create a certain sound. I thought he was slapping on the piano to create a certain sound. I didn't know. And then when I read into it, I thought, oh, that's what it is. Or I thought maybe somebody in the background is playing some percussive instrument or hitting on the stage floor. But so when you listen to it, listen for these kinds of sounds. With the SourcePoint 888, you hear all these delightful sounds. You hear Keith Jarrett humming and moaning and making verbal sounds as he's playing. He's so engaged. He's so into the improvisation. It's absolutely wonderful. The whole album's about hour and 8 minutes. I listened to the entire thing without stop, completely drawn into the music, completely fascinated by this one magical moment in time where everything conspired to make this a disaster, and yet this virtuoso, this genius, pulled it out and made it into the world's best-selling solo piano recording of all time, regardless of genre. That's right. This piece of music, this album, a jazz album, esoteric as it is, became the best-selling solo piano album of all time, regardless of genre. That is truly magical. And that's what I mean about inspired. When a recording is inspired, if your system has that magical quality, that soul, that je ne sais quoi, that I don't know how to tell you, you can't measure it, but if it does have it, it will reproduce it, and you will get lost in the music. So, does it have magic? Can it do magic? Absolutely. All right, let's summarize. Good. Amazing value for money as far as I'm concerned. Full range, capable of playing all sorts of music at up to very high levels. Well made. Some of you will disagree. I saw in some of the comments during the unboxing video, it's using the cheapest crossover parts. I have to roll my eyes because I have to wonder, what do you mean? The cheapest? You know, like seriously? Talk about exaggeration. Is he using the most expensive parts in the world? No. And I want to underline, just because something's expensive does not mean it's any good. You could pay a lot of money for crap. And just because something is inexpensive does not make it bad. Now keep also in mind that this is a $5,000 speaker, a three-way $5,000 speaker that weighs almost 100 pounds each, right? If you think you can do better and make it a commercial product, not just a do-it-yourself product. A few months ago, a client invited me to his house. I went to his house, and he was so proud of this do-it-yourself speaker. He told me that he had made a magical equivalent. I had to come see it. So I went to see it, and this thing was a piece of crap. I mean, a serious piece of crap. Did it sound like a magical? Not even close. So, and I've seen DIY products. Some are very nice. A lot of the ones are terrible. So I'm not saying that you can't do it. I'm just saying, if you are going to make those kinds of remarks, make your own speaker. And then let's see what you do. Relatively easy to drive. It's about 86, 87 dB sensitivity, 6 ohm load, so it's not difficult to drive. I would still recommend more power than less. Smooth, like a good tube amplifier. Again, a wonderful thing to have. I would much rather a speaker be smooth than a speaker that's dry and analytical. All right, bad. It's a relatively big speaker. You will need a bigger room if you don't want the speakers to visually overwhelm the room. It does like to be some distance from the front wall, so I would experiment. In our room, we have it from the back of the speaker to the front wall, approximately 3.5 to 4 feet. Now, part of that is not only due to the sound, but also because it's a multi-use room. As I mentioned earlier, the room is what we call our home theater music room, and so we have speakers already there for our home theater sessions. So the speaker obviously has to be a bit forward of it. Low volume levels, not as lifelike as higher volume levels, especially at life volume. So something to think about. Okay, choice of electronics is important, at least again to me. As much as I love Macintosh and recommend Macintosh without reservation with almost any speaker most of the time, with these particular ones, I would probably go with something a little bit more neutral. So Parasound, NAD, Hagel would all work really, really well. And then finally, the highs are maybe not quite as airy and delicate as the very best tweeters in the world. But again, I hesitate. I want to underline that this is not an expensive speaker by the high-end audio standards. Okay, ugly. None that I can think of. And I thought very hard. I really wanted to at least throw one or two ugly. I couldn't think of anything. So, in conclusion, as far as I'm concerned, home run. Andrew Jones, great job. Really, really, really good speakers. As a matter of fact, these may be one of my favorites of the speakers that you've designed in recent memory. So any of the ELECs, I much prefer these to any of the ELECs that you were involved with. Maybe not as good as your TAD efforts, but then your TAD efforts, the little mini monitors start at $15,000, $18,000 US. So, you know, a whole different snack bracket. In fact, I believe that these are certainly comparable and competitive with anything up to 10,000 Canadian dollars, so maybe 7,000 US dollars. So anything that Bowers & Wilkins, Focal, Sonus Fabers that we carry, Martin Logan, I would certainly put these in the mix and then compare them if you can. Ultimately, this is the result of Andrew Jones's 41 years of experience in the speaker world, developing and designing speakers, as well as his own earlier training as a physicist. So he not only has technical knowledge and ability, he also has real life experience to do these speakers. I certainly don't think too many people could do a speaker as well as these are. So that's my summary. Later on, if we have time, I will do a shootout with the speakers that we carry and then report back. I certainly hope that the other guys can join me, I should say. Unfortunately, it gets busy, and so it's hard to coordinate videos with everybody. Anyway, thanks for watching. Would love to read your comments below. Put them in. If you own any of the SourcePoint speakers, or if you've heard them, what do you think? If you heard these speakers, let me know what you think. And I'll see you again next time. Take care. Bye-bye.